Welcome to the final video in our Thinking, Problem Solving, and Language unit. Today we focus on language and exactly how we develop language and some different theories about how our brain processes language. So language we're going to define as the spoken, written, or signed words and the ways that they combine, the ways that we combine them in order to form meaning. Based on that definition, we would typically talk of animals or speak of animals having the ability to communicate, but not necessarily having a means of communication that is sophisticated enough to be really considered a language per se. That if you feel strongly another way, that's a debate for another day. And certainly there are many advocates for the idea that animals have some sort of language. But based on our definition, we'll just work with humans as being the only species that develop language. All right. The first thing we want to talk about are some basic concepts in the structure of language. First of all, we have phonemes. Phonemes are simply the smallest distinctive sound unit. And so you can take a look at each of these examples and figure out how many phonemes they have. For example, the word pig has 3 phonemes. There's the p sound that the p makes, the I sound that the I makes, and the g sound that the g makes. So 3 phonemes. But phonemes don't always have to be just letter by letter. So for example, ring also has 3 phonemes: the r sound, the I sound again for the I, and then the ng and the ng, it makes 1 phoneme. And so that one also has 3 phonemes. Am has 2. And make am, or and make am, I guess I should say. And so phonemes are very language specific. Obviously, different languages have different phonemes. And one of the interesting things about language development is that humans are born with the ability to understand and to hear really phonemes from any language. But after you reach a critical age, which is very young in your life, you lose the ability to really hear the phonemes correctly of languages that you weren't exposed to at a very young age. I mean, so that is why that even if you pick up a foreign language later in life and become very fluent in it, most native speakers will still be able to tell that you weren't born learning that language. That wasn't one of the languages you were exposed to early in life, because you'll still maintain a bit of an accent. And especially for languages that are very different from yours, you'll still have struggle with certain phonemes that language may possess that yours does not. Morphemes are the smallest unit that conveys meaning. So for me, the easiest way to remember that obviously is morphemes and meaning both start with M. And as long as you remember that, then you know that phonemes are the ones that deal with the number of, or the smallest unit that conveys sounds. So words can convey obviously meanings, but sometimes just a prefix or a suffix will do as well. And so we can look at these examples as well. Redraw, how many morphemes does that have? All right, this one has 2. Draw obviously has a meaning, and then re has a meaning also. It tells us that we're doing something again. Balls also has 2 morphemes. There's ball, some sort of round object that you're, playing with, basketball, football, whatever it might be, although I guess football not quite as round. And then the S implies plurality, right? That we have multiple balls that we're playing with. And then banana, of course, has just 1 phoneme. You can't break them. There's not a difference between the ba. The ba doesn't carry a meaning. The nana doesn't carry a meaning in this context. It may carry a meaning about the name that you give your grandmother in a different context. But in this one, there's just 1 morpheme for the word banana. All right, so you get that idea. We'll practice more with this in class next time. Grammar in a language is a set of rules that enables us to communicate with and understand others. So grammar helps us to make sure we understand exactly what the other person is trying to convey. And grammar has some basic concepts. One is semantics. The semantics are a set of rules from which we derive meaning from morphemes, words, etc. And so in our language, for example, the S or ES at the end of the word carries with it semantic meaning. Usually that means that it means a plurality. That's the meaning that it carries. Semantics are also what allows us to understand something that may be ambiguous. So the right to bear arms, for example. We understand that the right to bear arms isn't the right to wear a tank top and show off our guns, but rather it's the right to possess and own firearms within the United States. And so the semantics allows us to understand the meaning of that sentence. Syntax is a set of rules for combining words into grammatically sensible sentences. And if you think about yoga from Star Wars, if you've seen the movies, Yoda, excuse me, I said yoga. Yoda sounds weird to us. We can understand what he's saying. He's speaking in the movie's context in English, but nevertheless, it sounds weird. And the reason it sounds weird is his syntax is mixed up. It doesn't follow the typical rules for how we combine words to make sensible sentences. And so it sounds a little weird to us. With language development, we can also talk about the different stages of language development. So with receptive versus productive speech, receptive speech is simply that time period in your life when you were learning the meaning of words, you're learning the mouth movements, but this is all just through listening and observation. So when a baby is first born, they are in that receptive speech stage. And it continues beyond even when they start to be able to produce speech as well. But a lot of parents wonder how much the child is learning at an age before they can start to speak. And the answer is quite a bit. They're picking up on meanings. They're picking up on exactly how they're supposed to move their mouths. They're picking up on what words are very common in their environment, those types of things. Expressive or productive speech is when we actually start to say things that convey meaning. And so babies early on just kind of in that babble stage. The babble stage is very important. They may not be saying anything that is meaningful to anyone else, but for them, it's the practicing of making the sounds. And as they practice that more and more, a certain sound or a certain syllable may come out that actually conveys meaning. And that gets us into the one word stage. A lot of parents go into, raising children with the idea that they're going to be able to know exactly what their baby's first word is. And sometimes it's just not that clear. They say a syllable. Did they really mean to say, when they said ba, did they really mean that the ball that was right there? Or did they just happen to say that or whatever it might be? But nevertheless, around, 1 or 2 years old, they start to enter, well, really around 2 years, they enter this one word stage. In which they are really just expressing one word. So if they want the ball, they just say ball, and they may point at it, and that expresses their interests. Two words is obviously a stage in which they're starting to express themselves with literally two words, and it starts around age 2. So ball roll, for example, might be something they say, or bottle. They may not say bottle. They may say baba drink or whatever it might be. And so they start to express themselves with two words, or often a noun and a verb that go together. Now, the last thing we need to talk about are theories of language development. And so for Skinner's going to be someone we learn in a different unit. Skinner believed that only observable behavior could be studied. And so for him, there wasn't some internal kind of cognitive process here with language development. For him, it was very simple. We learn language through association. In other words, we see the people around us associate specific words with specific objects, and we learn those associations. We imitate those associations, and then we're reinforced by parents. And that reinforcement can come through, instances in which they get very excited when we say the correct word that goes with something, or when they ignore us when we say something, also reinforces. It tells us that probably isn't the exact way that we should say that, and it leads us to say it in a different way. But one of the questions that Skinner's theory couldn't really answer is this one that's on the screen here. If most sentences we make are unique in our language, and there are an infinite number of sentences that we can create, then why can this not fully explain how we learn and use language? So Skinner's theory is it's the operant learning, that we get reinforced positively and negatively. And it can't fully explain it because we've never actually heard the sentence that we're making said before. And so we are creating something new. And so it can't just be based on conditioning. There has to be something else that's going on. But we'll get into that what that something else might be with the next theory. Skinner also had this concept called overgeneralization. This is when we apply a grammar rule in a situation that it doesn't apply. In this case, we may be associating, grammatical rules that we've heard in other instances and applying it just to the wrong situation. So kids very often say he runned to the store. And language development experts would tell you not to get too worried about that, especially at a younger age. That if you can gently correct it, that's fine. But otherwise, this is just kind of a normal development process that they'll grow out of, especially if they're hearing the proper grammar around them. All right, the other theory is Chomsky's theory of language development. And for him, he argues that we are born with this kind of universal grammar understanding, that all languages follow kind of a general construct of grammar. There are things called nouns, there are things called verbs, and then we have adjectives and adverbs that kind of modify those things. And so therefore our brain is kind of hardwired and ready to learn language. And he argued that we have this kind of language acquisition device. Now, this has never been identified biologically. Certainly when Chomsky came up with this, he wouldn't have had a means to develop or to identify it biologically in the 60s and 70s. But for him, what the language acquisition device is, it's a part of the brain that allows you to understand the grammar rules of your native language from the limited information you receive about that language's grammar. So in other words, at a very young age, you're not getting all the information that you need, but you're able to pick up on those rules because we have this innate ability to understand grammar. And that's because and the evidence for this language acquisition device is the universality of grammar, the fact that most languages follow the same general grammatical rules. Of course, one of the downsides to this theory is that we've never actually been able to identify this part of the brain biologically, and so that's still left up in the air in terms of if it's accurate or not. All right, that wraps up language and problem solving and thinking as a unit. If you have any questions, you can email me at ghsteacher@gmail.com. Otherwise, I will see you in class.